Good morning, Metro. We are well today, I can tell. It's good to see you. And I could have texted you or anything during your sabbatical, and I was like, nope. Sabbatical? She's going to sabbatical. So, welcome back from your sabbatical. Oh, Lord help. So, today is the last Sunday of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I am going to, through this psalm, I want to bring survivors into this space. On the last day of October, I often say it's the last day of the month. This is the work that I do, but it's also the beginning of a new year because we don't just stop doing what we do in October. This is a year-round issue. And thank you for the reading of the word. And I have used Will Gaffney's translations, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Dr. Gaffney does use she pronouns and sometimes non-binary pronouns for God. Her project is about, and for the Psalms especially, she says, because so many people pray the Psalms devotionally, she says, I want to offer an opportunity to hear those compositions speaking to, by, and about women and girls, primarily to encounter God in explicitly feminine language, so all genders can experience a reading of God that shows up for them. Because if I'm in the Imago Dei, God has locks. Right? And this skin and all of this too. So, and in terms of, and I'll get to the expressive descriptions that she uses for God, because if you're familiar with the psalm, you were probably wondering, wait a minute, isn't the Lord my light? Yes. And she's inspired by other translators who also use expressive descriptions for God. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you'll understand why later. And then the last thing I just want to say is I use survivor language. I am a survivor of an experience that I had when I was 5 years old. I am a survivor. Some people use the word victim, but there's something about the word survivor. I'm also a Gen Xer, so I've got Gloria Gaynor in my head. And some of you may have Destiny's Child in your head. I'm a survivor. So I lean into the word survivor, and that is not to diminish those who have not yet chosen that word or who use the word victim. But for me, it's about survivorship. So I want to acknowledge the survivorship of the psalmist. They walk into a room and they said, the fire of Sinai is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The ark of safety is the strength of my life. Whom shall I dread? Now I read this, and when I was reading this, and I was thinking, they've got some kind of attitude. Start off right from the jump. I know who God is to me, so who am I going to be afraid of? In front of whom am I going to tremble in fear? This is bold, especially when those of us who do this work, and you all may know this as well, that instilling fear is the primary weapon that people in positions of power will use to make sure other people comply. Instilling fear, and whatever that may look like, the threat of fear or the actualization of fear, they use that to make sure people stay in their place, don't move out of their lane. But this person says, who? Afraid of you? Or as my folks would say, I ain't scared. But the psalmist's confidence isn't based on their own might or their own power. Their confidence and their determination are both based on the relationship they have with the source of the light they seek when they're in the shadow of violence. Their confidence is based on the ark of safety where they draw their strength. And a couple weeks ago, I think last month, I talked about safety and what it means to be safe. So we don't have to repeat that. But the ark of safety is where the survivor can turn to. And survivors do turn. And they turn and they turn again because survivors are very familiar with the oppressive partner's tactics. In order to survive violence, you have to know what the person who's bringing that violence into your life is up to. And you can be with someone for 6 months, and you're already starting to get an idea of their patterns, what they like, what they don't like. And survivors, domestic violence survivors, to be clear, have had to learn and anticipate their partner's moods, their likes, their dislikes, their fears, their desires, their emotions, their feelings, their wants, their needs, their behavior, their attitude, all of these things and on, because in any given moment, they may be besieged by those tactics that their partner employs to disempower them, like restricting access to their bank account, like whispers of, "I love you. I'm so sorry. You know I didn't mean that. I'm just under a lot of pressure," which only goes to manipulate the emotions of the person who is trying to figure out, "I love you," in all of this. Tactics like convincing the survivor's parents and their friends that, "Oh, well, you know, they're just a little emotional today. They're just blowing things out of proportion. It wasn't that bad, and I made up for it anyway. We're fine. We're just fine." Or tactics like preventing them from gathering with their friends, visiting the doctor, talking to their therapist, or even walking through those doors to make their way to have a seat with their spiritual siblings to sit in the presence of the womb of life and the fount of justice. It's interesting. I love these descriptive expressions because in the midst of this pattern of disempowerment, it's different. The pattern is different for every single survivor. And stats tell me it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 or 5 men who experience this violence. And it shows up differently for everybody. So it kind of makes sense that the way that I make sense of God being present in my life, the words I use might be different from somebody else. In my tradition, where I'm from, we would say, God shows up. And when I was writing this, I was reminded of a professor of mine from Union, not Troy, by the way, not Troy, who insisted that God doesn't show up. I know. Because if God is present, how can God show up? And maybe for those in the academy who are trained and professionalized theologian, to say God shows up isn't exactly sound theology. It's very quaint. It's actually almost primitive, I could hear those theologians say. But when God meets any of us at the very point of our need, at the very point of our particular, specialized, individualized, personalized need, when God shows up, when God's presence is known in that way, in that time, who is to say how the fulfillment of that need may meet up with our or my limited vocabulary? God shows up. We may utter our gratitude to the compassionate God. Oh, compassionate God, there it is right there. Because God showed compassion to me in that moment, and that's how I describe God. Let's be clear. God is God is God is God. But God can also be the fire of Sinai, the ark of safety, the fount of life, the wellspring of life, the fount of justice, the faithful one, a chariot of fire, a banner, a whisper in the night. And for the survivor, how God shows up for them is what helps them to see another day. So I love how Gaffney gives us all these descriptors to describe the many ways that God is present. And again, palpable. It's the goosebumps of God's presence. How do you describe that? And honestly, anyone who is trying to make sense of their life, their experiences, in conversation with God is a theologian. You don't need all the letters after your name. And you probably don't want all the numbers adding up in your student loan debt either. So, God is who we are in relationship with. All right, so let me see if I can pull this together. Because even with the descriptive language, understanding the tactics, survivors trying to survive this scourge in their life, what is the one thing that survivors desire? They want it to stop. They want the violence to stop. Now, here's the tricky part. Because those of us who want to support survivors often think that we know best for survivors. And so we'll say, well, then call the police, get the police involved, get that person locked up. The criminal injustice system does very little effectively to stop the violence. It's a temporary halt, and then they get out and they come back home. And actually, the violence might increase because the survivor decided that they were not going to be afraid and they were going to risk disempowerment. So I don't know if that's the system to do this. There is a way for us, especially as church folks, to be present to the needs of survivors. And it may be listening first. It may be asking, what do you need? It may be just saying, talk to me, tell me, how do you see God in your life? It may be, how should I pray for you right now? It could be a million other things, but it is first recognizing that survivors have a voice. This psalmist has a voice. They have a clear voice. They know who God is for them. But do we know who God is for them? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But I know the one thing that they want is for the violence to end. Then they will have peace. Then they'll feel true freedom. All the days of their lives, like the psalmist says. But isn't that what we all want? I don't know. I know that we had prayers of the people, and I know that there were things that you didn't say into the mic, things that didn't go in the chat, maybe things you won't even tell Tiffany or Troy or your neighbor or anybody. I know there are things that you are surviving right now. And I also know you want peace too. You want liberation. You want unfettered hope, indescribable joy, everlasting peace. Justice rolling through our society, rolling through your home, rolling around your block where you live. I know that these are things that we all want. I also know that if survivors don't have these, if they're not free, none of us are free. But this psalm says, the fire of Sinai is my light and my salvation. Whom shall we fear? The ark of safety is my stronghold. Of whom shall we be afraid? Let us continue to seek God's radiant face as God's countenance shines from every corner of this building. Let us continue to gather survivors in as the compassionate God has also gathered us in. The same comfort we have received in our time of need is the same comfort that we can pour out from our own chalices into somebody else's. I am encouraged by the words of this psalm. And I hope this psalm will encourage your heart, strengthen you, light the way for you in whatever it is you're surviving, and in whatever way you are offering support to others. Let the church say amen.